Okay, John, why don't you get started?
All right, excellent. Thank you, Lori, for having me. My name's John Kirchner. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I run our Midwest Regional Office. So I cover the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North and South Dakota, and Nebraska. And I'm glad to be here today to provide you with some information on the Federal CARES Act, commonly called as the Phase 3 bill that was recently passed. We'll kind of walk through here briefly what's in it for individuals. We'll talk about what's in it for all employers, larger employers, and we'll spend the bulk of our time talking about small businesses, nonprofits, things of that nature. Quick overview for individuals. This is a $2 trillion package. So if you want to think of the size and scale of it, it's equivalent to about 10% of our country's GDP. So it's very significant. What's nice is there's also an additional potential for an additional $4 trillion in support of the economy through the Federal Reserve, the way they are able to leverage some of these dollars for future lending. This is often referred to as the Phase 3 bill. At the end, I'll talk a little bit about what was in the Phase 2 bill. Phase 2 was very much about the employees and kind of a paid leave, the Families First bill it's called, in terms of when this was just starting up, how do employees take care of themselves, take care of their family, and still get paid. This is much more about small business and how do we keep businesses engaged, and how do we keep employers employed, and how do we keep that connection made so when the time comes that we're able to restart our economy, these businesses can start up quickly again, get their employees back to work. On the individual side, automatic payments to individual taxpayers, $1,200 per individual, $2,400 for a joint return, and $500 per additional child. This is phased out for incomes above $75,000 and $150,000 for joint filers. This also includes expanded unemployment, where most of the restrictions on eligibility are suspended if that unemployment is related to COVID-19. So sole proprietors, things of that, and people of that nature in the past maybe didn't qualify for unemployment. Those restrictions have been lifted in most cases. Federal government's kicking in an additional $600 per week on top of your regular state benefit through July 31st. These benefits are still provided through the state unemployment offices, and I believe they're going to be backdated to like March 30th or March 25th for Minnesota. I saw that from the governor, but I don't recall specifically which that date was. An important part of discussion here when this was going on in the Senate and the House was there was some concern from that with the extra $600 that employees would there'd be a disincentive for them to return to work because they might be making more on unemployment than they are on the job. But it's important to note that this eligibility ends when an individual can return to work. And if he or she says, no, I don't want to come back to work, I'm making more, the second you open your doors or you're able to return them to work, they are no longer eligible for this additional benefit. Next slide here. Major provisions for employers. So we'll talk about all employers, larger employers, and again, the small businesses, self-employed, independent contractors, and nonprofits. It's available to all employers regarding payroll taxes. You can delay payment of your payroll taxes, that 6.2%, that Social Security portion of your payroll taxes between now and January 1st of 2021. If you choose to do that, 50% is due at the end of 2021. The remaining 50% is due at the end of 2022. This is not a payroll tax cut. This, like virtually everything in this bill, is focused on liquidity and providing businesses with as much liquidity in the short term as they can to keep, because the goal of this bill is largely to keep, as much as we can, keep employers paying their employees, even if they're not able to provide services. One, again, as I mentioned earlier, from the economic standpoint, in terms of when we start up again, getting the economy open and running again. The other part is we don't want to bankrupt our state unemployment insurance offices. So this is kind of a goal of how do we keep people off unemployment as much as possible. One important note about this is if this does not apply to employers who have loans forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program, and we'll talk about that later. So you can't delay your payroll taxes and have a loan forgiven under the PPP. Some tax changes, I'll walk through this quickly. Some relating to net operating loss, accelerated recovery of AMT credits, interest deductibility, and qualified improvement property fix. Another element that's available to all employers, that hasn't been talked about a lot, it was added to the bill somewhat late in the process, is the employee retention credit. And this applies to employers who are fully or partially shut down or have a 50% drop in gross receipts in a quarter compared to the prior year. And what this is it's a refundable tax credit for 50% of the wages, including employer health plan expenses, paid by the employer up to $10,000 per employee. So basically, if you think about it, this is a $5,000 tax credit per employee that is available. For employers with more than 100 employees, this applies to employees only to employees not providing services. So if you are paying them, but they're not able to come into work, or you're an unessential business, something of that nature, it applies to those not providing services, but still being paid. If you have 100 or less employees, it applies to all employees that you're paying during the eligible time period. Again, similar to the payroll tax delay, employers are not eligible for this if they receive a Paycheck Protection Program loan. So we don't want to be double dipping, so to speak. And it does allow for advance payment of the credit. I'll move through quickly. Mid-sized, larger employers. There was a total of $500 billion in this bill to the Treasury Department for loans, loan guarantees. I should say there's $500 billion targeted towards mid-sized and larger employees. $454 billion of that is for loans, loan guarantees, Federal Reserve credit facilities. The remaining $46 billion is for special programs for the airline industry and critical national security businesses. Should note, if you do avail yourself to this lending, we're likely to see some restrictions on stock buybacks and executive compensation as a result of that. But that's what is available for mid-sized and larger employees. And we'll move on here to small businesses. What's available for small businesses? The big one, the new program everyone seems to be talking about that's in the news a lot, is the Paycheck Protection Program. This program offers $349 billion in loans for small businesses, which are generally less than 500 employees, 501c3 nonprofits, self-employed, sole proprietors, and independent contractors. So it's a very far-reaching, encompassing program. The loans are equal to the lesser amount of 2.5 months of your average payroll, or $10 million. These loans are being administered by local and national lenders. So this is an SBA program, but it's not being run through the SBA like a different program we'll talk about in a minute. But your local banks, your national banks in your communities in the state around the country are the ones who are doing this lending. Very minimal requirements to qualify: no collateral, no personal guarantee. What's unique about these loans and what's special about these loans is that they convert to grants equal to the amount spent on payroll, rent, interest on your mortgage, and utilities for 8 weeks after the origination, so long as 75% of that is used on payroll. The goal here is to keep your employees off unemployment, to keep your employees employed by you, engaged by your company. So the example I like to use, if you get a $10 million loan and you spend $8 million of that on payroll, rent, interest on mortgage, utilities for 8 weeks after the origination of the loan, you get that $8 million forgiven. That $8 million will be forgiven on that loan, which is nice. If you were to spend all $10 million on that, your full loan amount on that, so long as 75% is on payroll, the full loan amount will be forgiven. What's important to note is forgiveness is reduced proportionally if the employer reduces the number of full-time employees. So if you have laid off employees, or if you do lay off employees, the forgiveness will be reduced proportionally. And the forgiveness will be reduced proportionally again if you reduced wages by more than 25%. But what's nice is you can avoid the reduction in this forgiveness if you bring employees back and restore wages within 30 days and maintain that through June 30th. So if you already laid somebody off, or you do in the short term, but within 30 days you bring them back and maintain their employment through June 30th, you can avoid having that reduction in that forgiveness reduced. An important note here too is when you're figuring out your 2.5 months of average payroll, you can only account up to $100,000 per employee. So if you have an employee making $75,000, you include all that. you have an employer making $150,000 employee, you can only account for $100,000 of that 150 when you're figuring this out. So that's an important distinction to note. And we'll take some questions later on this, but important note, you go to uschamber.com/SB Loans. It's a quick 4-page easy document that will lay out how do I qualify, do I qualify, what do I need, how do I figure out that 2.5 months payroll, what is included in that, what's not included in that. Maybe you're a seasonal business, there's a little bit different there. Maybe you're a new business and you don't have a full 2019 year of payroll to go back to. A lot of your questions will be answered in there, and it's a very good, quick resource in terms of figuring that out. But I would add a lot of questions. There seems to be a fair amount of gray area. This program just rolled out on Friday of last week. A lot of lending has been done. A tremendous amount of lending has been done, but there is still some guidances that lenders are looking for from the SBA. So I would encourage you, before you get too far in the process, to make sure you're talking to your lender, to make sure you're talking with your accountant, to make sure you're doing it right, but B, that this is the right program for you. And I would suspect Lori would probably know who your local lenders are in your community and in your area that are engaged in this program. If they're already a small business lender, they're pre-approved and they're adding new lenders in. Similarly, the SBA website has a list of lenders in the state of Minnesota as well, if you're interested in who that might be. The other small business program that isn't a new program per se, disaster loans. People have used these typically in the past for natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, things of that nature. But there are some new elements. These are often called EIDL loans, economic injury disaster loans. These are available to small businesses, all nonprofits, including faith-based, with fewer than 500 employees, sole proprietors, and independent contractors. So it's a little bit more inclusive than the PPP program in terms of nonprofits accessibility. These loans are up to $2 million in working capital loan for up to a 30-year term. Payments are deferred for up to 1 year. So again, this is about providing short-term and immediate liquidity, so you can defer the payments on that for a year. Loans are based on credit scores. No tax returns are required. Up to $200,000 without a personal guarantee. And what's also new about these loans is you can get up to a $10,000 emergency grant within 3 days that does not have to be repaid. So it's not a full $10,000. You can get up to $10,000, but if you get this emergency grant and for whatever reason you don't qualify for the EIDL loan, you don't have to pay that grant money back. That's a short-term. How do you keep the lights on? How do you, keep your business alive for the short term? So that is a valuable, important tool as well. This program does interact with the Paycheck Protection Program. You can avail yourself to both loan programs, but it's important to note you can't spend the funds for the same purpose, so you can't double dip, so to speak. So before you say, I'm going to do an EIDL loan and I'm going to do a PPP loan, make sure you're talking to your lenders and your accountants to make sure that you are using the funds properly and accordingly, because you can't use them for the same purposes again. So you can avail yourself to both again, but make sure that you're talking and engaged with your financial advisors in terms of how to do that. What's different about this is run through the SBA, not through your local and national lenders. So you apply through sba.gov and all the resources. There's a ton of resources there as well. And in addition to that one pager we had on the small business loans at uschamber.com, we also have one pagers on the EIDL loans, on the employee retention tax credit, on the payroll stuff. There's one pagers or small checklists on all of those as well. Talk a little bit about what was in phase 2. As I mentioned, the Family First bill was much more about families and making sure earlier in the process, before everything was shut down, that employees had a way to get paid sick leave. Employers with less than 500 employees are required to provide 10 days of paid sick leave if that leave is related to COVID-19. It's available for those who are ill themselves or are quarantined due to exposure, have to take care of a sick family member or a child due to child care or school closure, which is basically all of us here right now. Leave is paid at the regular rate of up to $511 per day if you're taking care of yourself, paid at 2/3 of that, up to $200 per day if you're taking care of a family member. Payment up to the maximum is reimbursed by the federal government. This leave is in addition to what you're already providing, not in place of, but in addition to. Small exemption for businesses with less than 50 employees. They're exempt from providing leave related to caring for a child whose school is closed if providing that leave threatens the viability of the business. And paid leave is not available if an employee can telework. Last big slide here on FMLA, then we'll get to questions. Similar to paid leave, up to 10 weeks of paid FMLA if that leave is related to COVID-19, paid at 2/3 rate of $200 per day, up to $10,000. This is in addition to any other paid FMLA you're offering. The federal government is reimbursing up to the max. The same exemption applies for the small businesses under 50, and again, also not available if an employee can telework. Again, uschamber.com, tremendous amount of resources on all these programs, how they interact. uschamber.com/co is a valuable resource for small businesses specifically about all these programs, but just a lot of other small business tools and resources in terms of how to operate, how to engage with your employees during these times. So a lot of great resources out there. And with that, I will stop sharing and I will hand it back over to Lori for any Q&A.
Thanks, John. I know that one that I got in earlier was regarding how overwhelmed the SBA lenders are right now. Wells Fargo for a while is not taking more applications. So what is your advice to people who are having problems finding a lender?
I would say go to the SBA website. They will have a list of the approved lenders in your area. Some lenders I know who probably shouldn't have been doing this, but were servicing their customers first instead of taking on new customers, which doesn't make sense to me because it seems to be a wise opportunity to take this free money and build a new business relationship with a new client. But I think it was because there was so much money coming in, it was turning around so fast. So that would be where I'd start. And I don't know, Lori, if you've been in contact with lenders locally there in your community, and you might know certainly to a certain degree who's still taking applications. In Wells Fargo, I think is a unique example, but also there was a big push and rush because I think they were afraid they were going to run out of money in the government. And I was on a call with Congressman Stauber yesterday, and I've done a couple other ones with members of Congress from my region. They've all said, and they've already talked about this in the news, but they've all said, we had to put pen to paper. We had to put a number in the bill, and it was a somewhat arbitrary number, this $349 billion. And the expectation always was, if this money runs out, they will refill those coffers. And there's already talk about adding another $250 billion to this program because it has been so popular. But also some of the delays and some of the challenges are related to, it's frustrating for the small businesses, but if you think of how much money has been loaned out already out of basically $350 billion in less than a week, it's been pretty tremendous, and there have been some hiccups, but the program has run quite smoothly so far. So I would encourage you, again, SBA.gov, or maybe reach out to Lori and she can help get you in touch with some of those lenders that are working locally. They're community lenders. You just don't have to go to a big bank, and I think the big banks have probably seen the most pressure. So, there might be some opportunities with some of the smaller local and community lenders that may have more capacity right now to service those loans.
Thank you. And I do have some names of some local folks if people are having problems. One follow-up to that, and then I'll start going through the questions coming through the chat. So for people who are in the process still of applying for a PPP, should they be sending it to multiple lenders in hopes that their chances increase, or just one?
No, this isn't. The EIDL loans maybe have more criteria. The PPP loans basically have no criteria. So it's not a matter of, you're not going to, if you're a business and if you fit the criteria and it's in that program, and the criteria are basically, are you an employer? Do you have less than 500 employees? There are minimal criteria. So this isn't an issue of improving your chances by sending it out more broadly, that one might deny you, and that's kind of your only shot. So I would caution maybe against that, because you don't want 3 different lenders to approve you and then all of a sudden have a problem with the SBA that you've gotten approved multiple different times. And I think one of the qualifications in here is that you don't have, I can't find it right now, but that you don't have loan applications in anywhere else where I believe is a criteria. So I don't think you need to do that.
Okay, thank you. So one question from the chat, can you ask what the income is calculated from, 2018 taxes or 2019 taxes? Also for the child payments, if you have a child in 2020, are these people missing out on the extra 500?
I believe it's based on, I'm not sure on the 2020, the extra 500. I believe the individual payments are going to be based on the 2019, on your, I guess it would be your 2018, because your 2019 probably aren't done because that has been extended. So I believe those are tied to your 2018 statement. So if you had a child in maybe in 2019, I'm not sure, or 2020, that would be something to check with your accountant on. But I believe it's tied to your 2018 just because they've delayed 2019 taxes to July now. So most people haven't done those yet, or many maybe haven't.
Yeah, it's my understanding as well. How far behind is the distribution of the 10,000 emergency fund? I applied over a week ago.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be within 3 days. I've been told if you applied before March 30, you may need to reapply. Is the guidance the SBA has given, that they kind of started that starting March 30th. So if you applied March 28th to 29th, you might have to reapply for that. I was on a call yesterday, and the local SBA district director was on, and he said that he understands that money was starting to go out this week. So that promise of 3 days maybe hasn't been fulfilled. And I'm not sure if that's because of the influx of applications so quickly and just heaping that on the SBA, or if that was an internal delay. I'm not sure, but hopefully they will get that time frame down to the 3 days. But I was told by him yesterday they're starting to roll out this week, but if you applied again before March 30, then you may need to reapply.
And can you apply for the $10,000 grant without applying for the SBA loan?
I believe you can. But that grant is up to $10,000. So you might only qualify, and I'm not certain on that criteria, you might only qualify for 5 or 6 or 7,000. So.
Okay. Some banks are refusing to do PPPs if you don't have a business account with them. Is that oops, hold on, the screen just went. Is that a requirement for a sole proprietor or independent contractor to have a business account?
It is not a requirement. I know that started happening, and I know that created some frustration with Treasury and the SBA because that wasn't the point of this. The point was to get this money out as quickly as possible. I know some banks have done that again. I'm not sure if they did that just due to the high quantity and they just wanted to process their accounts first, or if it was we just want to service our accounts and our customers. That doesn't make sense to me from a business perspective. Why not build new relationships with lenders? But I would say this is an opportunity to find new lenders as well for businesses. That's frustrating, and that's not the purpose of it. But we have seen that a little bit around the country.
I have heard conflicting advice on using gross payroll versus net payroll when applying. What is your take on that?
Figuring out the payroll. I'll just walk through this a little bit, what's included, because I don't know forgive me for not knowing the difference between gross and net payroll, but what's included is some payments of any compensation with respect to employees that is a salary, wage, or commission, payment of cash tip or equivalent, payment for vacation, parental, family, medical, sick leave, payment required for the provisions of group health care benefits, retirement benefits, state and local tax that assessed. What's excluded, the big ones that are excluded is compensation, again, over $100,000. Payroll taxes are not included, they are excluded. And any compensation of an employee whose principal place of residence is outside of the United States. So I don't know if that answers the gross or net. It may, but that is what is included and largely what's excluded. There might be some more minor things, but those are the big chunks and buckets.
Okay, and this appears to be more of a comment, but maybe looking for verification, that the $500 per child does not include other dependents like college kids. Is that your understanding?
Yes, right. I believe that is, if you're 17, it counts. If you're 18, it doesn't.
Okay. And then again, this appears to be more of a comment. Some independent contractors have made the mistake of using personal accounts for their business activity, and now that all the applications are made online for business accounts, it appears they will not be able to apply.
That's a good point. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't heard that yet. I'm unaware of that in terms of a problem, but that would be unfortunate if that's the case. But I would encourage you to talk to your lender nonetheless, because they have liberalized this program so much in an effort to get so much money out there and so much liquidity out there that I would hope that wouldn't be the case. But I would definitely talk to your accountant and lender on that, because they've eliminated so many restrictions. They're trying to give the money away as much as they can, really.
So if you had kids in 2019 but have not filed taxes, is there a way to get the $500 for them?
I don't know. That would be a question for your accountant.
Okay. And if the $10,000 grant is not granted to a small business, how will the SBA inform the business?
I assume it'd be just directly. I'm not sure how it works now with how if it's online, or I'm not sure how they inform you now if you got a loan, or what the terms, or what that process is. But I would imagine it would be electronically, the way they're trying to service it. You're applying online. I would assume they're going to notify you as well in that same manner.
Okay, I'm looking. It seems like so far those are all the actual questions we have. In case people aren't familiar with the chat, there is an opportunity to click the chat button below on the bottom of your screen. Click on that, and then you can type in a message either to me privately or to everyone, and we can get that addressed. While we're waiting for that, John, do you have any other insights, guidance, best practices?
I mean, in terms of best practices, there's just such a flurry of activity around these. I'd make sure this maybe seems obvious, but I say it anyway, that make sure you do your due diligence and pre-work in terms of talking to your accountant and lender and filling out the application before you go in, because there is, like I said, a tremendous amount of pressure on these lenders to get this money out fast. And the easier you make it for them in terms of having the information filled out correctly and working with your accountant financial advisor versus just kind of going in blank and saying, how do I do this? They're trying to turn these loans around very quickly. So the more time you put in on the front end, the faster it will go and easier it will be for your lender on the back end as well.
And I know the SBA is still conducting online trainings for people so that they can get some insights as to how to apply correctly the first time around. I have heard, and I've got a couple more scrolling in here that I'll get to in just a second, but I've heard that, as people are expecting a $10,000 grant, people with less than 10 employees, is actually only up to $1,000 per employee, and not necessarily a guarantee of $1,000 per employee either. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, initially it was communicated as everyone gets a $10,000 grant. And then it kind of like, well, it might not be 10, it might be up to 10, and then it might be 1,000 per employee. And then now that's kind of in question. And this is kind of an ongoing guide. As these questions arise, the SBA is clarifying some of them more and more as this process goes through. So I know it's a little bit frustrating, but we're working with the SBA, and I think they're doing the best they can. For the most part, they're doing a tremendous job.
Okay, so here's a few more questions coming in. Is the PPP appropriate for sole proprietors that aren't drawing formal paychecks?
Yes, yep, it is. And because there's a note in here, if you're not drawing normal paychecks, you would include the sum of payments of any compensation to or income of a sole proprietor. So if you're not drawing a regular paycheck, but if you just take your draw, or however it's done, you kind of average that over 12 months, kind of like how you would do payroll. And then that would be how you'd figure out the 2.5 months.
And it looks like we've got some accountants in our chat too, Rod and Robin in particular. Thank you. They've been filling in some of the blanks, it looks like, for how to apply and then how to calculate payroll. So that's great. Let's see.
And I'd encourage those accountants, if I'm giving misinformation or you have more, feel free to chime in, because I'm all for, I want to make sure we get everything answered appropriately.
And let's see, when can independent contractors apply for unemployment?
I believe as soon as they are unemployed, if their business stops, as soon as they're not receiving checks and as soon as those contracts end, is my understanding, is when they can apply. It's an important note too. People have asked regarding that unemployment. Well, what if my employee says I'm making more, I don't want to come back? That's not an option. If they can work, they are ineligible for that unemployment, that extra $600. I've had people ask, well, they might make more on unemployment than they make for me. Should I just lay them off and let them do that? And I guess that would be an option, but our goal is to communicate. The point of this is to keep employees employed so that when this serves as a bridge for when commerce opens up again, that your employees are engaged and are ready to work. So this isn't a matter of how do we get them the most money. The goal is let's keep them employed. That's why we have these programs to reimburse you for paying them. And and also, some independent or like sole proprietors have said, well, can I go on unemployment and keep my business open? And it's kind of one of those, you can't, so long as your business is open. I mean, if you're unemployed, you're unemployed. You can't kind of do both, right?
Yes, and it looks like there's a note here that Minnesota has not opened the applications to independent contractors as of yesterday. Rod, it looks like they might be able to as of tomorrow. Is that right? Hey, Rod, do you want to chime in on that?
Oh, hi, good morning. So what I heard yesterday was from the commissioner of Minnesota Deed is that they have just opened the window for the extra 600 that the federal government will be covering. And that is only for people that have been applying to unemployment through regular channels. Kathy, I believe, noted that, yes, it has not been open to independent contractor as of yet. So that's the status.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? I haven't seen any others come through. John, are we looking at another wave from the federal government soon? Are they going to do another phase 4, I believe?
Yeah, maybe. It's unfortunate. I think it's going to get political very quickly, where they want to dump another $250 billion into this, and this is turning into a political exercise where the Senate Majority Leader is kind of trying to force the hand for the Democrats and is calling for, hopefully, to get unanimous consent, which is basically, if no one objects, they don't all have to come back to Washington and vote on this. They can just do it really quickly. The House Democrats are kind of like, well, we have some other things we'd like too, in terms of more SNAP benefits, more benefits to hospitals, more benefits to state and local governments, that they want included in this as well. And so it appears that they're just not going to accept the Democrats aren't going to accept let's just add 250 billion without something else. I think also that we'll see what happens with that. I think there's some opportunities with a potential phase 4, and there are also some concerns with a potential phase 4. I think we've been working in DC in terms of what would we from a business community like to see in that. But if you remember kind of how the process went, phase 2, the Families First, was led by the House, so the House Democrats led that and kind of gave it to the Senate and basically said, take it or leave it, right? Do you want to be in the position of not passing this, right? So phase 3, Majority Leader McConnell in the Senate, the Republicans said, we're taking the lead here, and then they're going to jam it down the throat of the Democrats in the House, kind of, again, take it or leave it. Do you want to be the ones to say no? And so we suspect that phase 4 may likely begin in the House again. And there are some potential concerns with that, because there's a lot of talk of non-COVID related items being thrown in there. People are talking about, how do we include Green New Deal? How do we include climate change stuff? How do we include, a lot of other kind of political elements that are not related to this? So there are some concerns with that potentially, but there are also some opportunities in terms of what else could be in here. There's a lot of talk about how do we get 501c6s and the chambers of commerce to be included in the PPP program. That was something that was not even being considered until we had our big push at the end. And it was literally the last thing taken out of the bill at the last hour. So we're in talks of what should be included, because I think phase 4 may, depending on how long this takes, but it appears that phase 4 may potentially also we'd be able to focus on phase 4 being reopening the economy, whereas phase 3 has very much been like, how do we keep these businesses afloat? Phase 4 might be focused on how do we get these guys, these men and women in these businesses back into the business world. But that's a very long answer to a short question. So the answer is yes, I think there's going to be something, but so there are some potential concerns about what could be in that bill, and is it more painful to swallow than the good stuff we could be getting. So, but we'll see. They haven't put pen to paper yet. It's just a lot of rumor and conjecture, but we continue to press that we want it to be focused on COVID-19 specifically. And obviously we're putting together our list of what the business community needs.
Thank you. And I'm all for the 501c6s getting added, but a couple more have come in here. So ask about S Corp owners using draws for the PPP. We are all getting denied on UI.
On the unemployment?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure I understand if they're getting denied on applying for unemployment, or they're getting denied for the PPP.
Looks like they're getting denied on unemployment. S Corp owners using draws for the PPP. And I'm unmuting Deb Wheeler here so she can explain that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. Sorry.
I have several clients, including myself, who are S Corp owners, but we take draws the first part of the year. Mm-hmm. And so therefore we're not on the unemployment reports until the last part of the year. I have some that just elected coverage, and they are actually getting denied until 2021. They got accepted as of April 1, but they're getting denied coverage.
For unemployment?
Through unemployment. I have letters, and there's no way to appeal it.
Yeah, and that unemployment, that's unfortunately, I think that's a Minnesota issue, because the state manages and runs the unemployment insurance, and they're just processing that. They're just basically passing through that extra $600. So I don't know if
it's just the base unemployment is getting denied. The applications are getting denied for S Corp owners that do not have payroll right now. My PPP, I submitted my draws and made a comment about it, but I haven't heard if I'm going to get approved or not. I know my employees will, but I don't know if I will get approved.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand it enough. I'm sure if you're talking about you're not getting approved for the PPP loan.
For unemployment for my clients.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of that, if that's a Minnesota deed unemployment thing, or forgive me, I'm just not familiar with that unemployment side of it.
Okay.
We'll have to see if we can find a resource for you, Deb.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. In the meantime, John, do you have a number of how many small businesses have applied for either the EIDL or PPP?
We don't have a number yet. I know. I'm trying to think of how much. I saw a number yesterday in terms of how much has been the estimate and how much has been loaned out, and they've already loaned out over $100 billion, I believe, is what I read yesterday. So it's moving fast. In a week, they've exhausted just about 25% of that original amount. So it's moving very quickly, but I don't know how many businesses have applied.
Okay, so my business has only been open a year with no payroll, and technically we are an essential business, but we really don't have business. Would I apply for the EIDL loan to cover expenses, or would it be better to try to have one of the owners get unemployment during this time?
We're an essential. Oh, well, I don't know. I don't believe you can do unemployment, and if you're unemployed, you have to be unemployed, right? And I'm not sure where that distinction lies on that, but there might be an option for the PPP loan as well. You might be able to get the PPP and then use that to pay yourself or to pay whomever, and then you can have that forgiven. I don't know that you need to go the route of the EIDL loan. You might be able to use the PPP and have that forgiven. But you could apply for an EIDL loan to cover those expenses if you wanted to.
Okay, and because I've gotten a couple of notes here about local lenders, I know we've got a couple of FIs being represented on the phone, and I'm not going to put them on the spot and call out their names, but I'm wondering if they want to share any information about if they're taking applications from non-members, any advice that you have. If you want to speak, raise your hand or send me a note. I see some people nodding their heads that they're interested in that. So if we don't have anybody in the call, I will, I'll circle back with people privately and try to get some information out to you, because I know that's definitely a hot topic. And yeah, noting that Wells Fargo customers need help in particular. Okay. Not seeing any other questions come through. So kind of last call here, got a few minutes, but I want to respect your time. So if there's no other questions, John, do you have any closing words of advice?
No, I would just say thanks to you, Lori, for convening the group and for helping us get this information out there. There's a lot to digest. I'd also recommend that anyone double check any of my answers with Rod here, who seems to be the pro accountant, and make sure your lenders are obviously engaged. And hopefully, Lori, I know you'll be a good resource for being able to get people connected to some of your local lenders as well. And when possible, make sure your lenders are members of the Metro North Chamber. There's value there.
Thanks, John. And on that note too, at the Chamber, we're happy to put together additional webinars going forward on topics that would be helpful. We know right now, obviously, it's about the loans and the grants, but if there's other issues from employee engagement to HR concerns, you know, we're happy to leverage our resources and pull together experts on topics that are going to help you get through this, and then obviously a road to recovery as well. So if you want to send me any other questions via email, I'll do my best to connect you with answers. Otherwise, thank you all for being on the call and all that you're doing, and we are here for you. So best of luck, and we will stay in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.